Since its inception, the United States has represented a land of opportunity and a safe haven for both political and religious freedom. During the mid-1800s, waves of immigrants from Ireland sought to escape widespread famine, while those from Germany fled government persecution after a failed revolution. By the late 1800s and early 1900s, these waves represented populations from Central, Southern, and Eastern Europe. Millions arrived from Poland, Russia, Greece, Hungary, and Turkey and were processed at the Immigration Inspection Station located on Ellis Island. Each one chased the American dream: democracy, rights, liberty, opportunity, and equality. Unfortunately, for many, reality proved to be much different.
While Emma Lazarus' poem, The New Colossus, extended the promise of caring for those huddled masses yearning to breathe free, immigrants often found this land of opportunity to be much less welcoming than they had imagined. These new immigrants of the early 1900s were blamed for bringing crime and poverty, accused of stealing American jobs, and were criticized for refusing to Americanize. In 1915, while delivering an address to the Knights of Columbus, Theodore Roosevelt summed up the deepening anti-immigrant sentiment in the United States.
There is no room in this country for hyphenated Americanism. A hyphenated American is not an American at all.
The years surrounding America's involvement in World War I highlighted how the country treated foreigners within its borders during wartime. When the United States declared war with Germany in April of 1917, German immigrants and even American-born citizens of German descent fell under the suspicion of being disloyal. Many were classified as alien enemies, and the federal government enacted a series of measures prohibiting them from owning firearms, aircraft, wireless devices, or departing the United States without permission. Moreover, these labels, alien enemies, were required to register with the government. They could even be removed to a location designated by the president, thereby providing a foundation for the later internment of suspect individuals. Any man who carries a hyphen about with him, Woodrow Wilson declared, carries a dagger that he's ready to plunge into the vitals of this republic whenever he gets ready.
The 1917 Russian Revolutions heightened the mistrust Americans held to those seeking asylum in the United States. In March, Tsar Nicholas II was forced to abdicate the throne, and by October, Russia was left in the hands of Vladimir Lenin and his ruthless Bolshevik Party. This new government established the Cheka, a security organization designed to expose and punish those to be considered enemies of the people. Americans feared that the socialist and communist philosophies that had spread throughout Russia would find a foothold in the United States, that America, too, would be plagued by hangings, forced labor, mass murders, and widespread starvation.
In May 1918, the Sedition Act imposed a fine of $10,000 and an imprisonment of up to 20 years upon anyone who printed, wrote, or published disloyal or abusive information about the government of the United States. That October, Congress passed the Alien Act, authorizing the deportation of any alien who, at any time after entering the United States, was found to have joined any anarchist organization. Every alien who comes to these shores and begins preaching against the United States government, one editorial proclaimed in November 1918, should be imprisoned at once. Deportation is not sufficient. An advertisement by W.M. Short in November 1919 was more blunt.
We must smash every un-American and anti-American organization in the land. We must put to death the leaders of this gigantic conspiracy of murder, pillage, and revolution.
The hysteria over America's Red Summer of 1919 peaked on May 1st. During the International Workers' Day celebration, a day when many in the United States gathered to champion workers' rights, labor leaders, socialists, and union workers paraded through the streets of several American cities. Soon, marchers found themselves assaulted by vigilantes. Gangs attacked the Socialist Party headquarters in Boston. Dozens of World War I veterans raided the Russian People's House in New York, gathered magazines and books, and set them ablaze. In Cleveland, rioters threw furniture out windows of the Socialist Party headquarters, while ex-soldiers drove a tank into a parade of socialists at Cleveland Public Square, killing one and injuring 40 others.
But the pivotal event of America's Red Summer involved a series of mail bombings targeting government officials, including Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer. Having survived the attempt, such attacks, according to Palmer, constituted proof that communists were attempting to subvert American institutions, and these communists, Palmer argued, were overwhelmingly immigrants. My information, Palmer wrote in his essay, The Case Against the Reds, showed that communism in this country was an organization of thousands of aliens of the same misshapen cast of mind and indices of character, making the same glittering promises of lawlessness, of criminal autocracy to Americans that they had made to the Russian peasants.
Between November 1919 and January 1920, Attorney General Palmer authorized a series of raids against alien residents accused of communist, socialist, anarchist, or otherwise anti-democratic sentiments. During these Palmer raids, between 5 and 10,000 suspects were detained without warrants in 30 cities across 23 states, often beaten and denied access to both family members and legal representation. No evidence of any proposed revolution will ever uncover the majority of those detained were actually American citizens whose most grievous offense was either belonging to a union or joining the wrong political party. Even the Supreme Court, charged with defending the constitutional rights of Americans, failed to intervene. In the 1919 case of Schenck versus United States, Chief Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes issues an unanimous opinion declaring that free speech that constituted a clear and present danger to the country could be punished. Ultimately, hundreds of these enemies, aliens, were denaturalized and deported.
Perhaps the most tragic expression of American xenophobia in the aftermath of World War I involved the arrest of 2 immigrants charged with armed robbery and murder. In May 1920, Niccolo Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti were charged with robbing the Moro Shoe Company. Both a guard and a paymaster were killed during the robbery. At a time when Italian anarchists were at the top of the United States government's list of dangerous enemies, and when anti-Italianism was widespread throughout the country, Sacco and Vanzetti were convicted and sentenced to death. All attempts to appeal the conviction were denied, and on August 23, 1927, both Italian immigrants were executed.
When a widespread radical uprising that Attorney General Palmer predicted for May Day 1920 failed to materialize, the national hysteria towards both perceived communist subversives and immigrants in general began to wane. That month, the newly organized American Civil Liberties Union published its report upon the illegal practices of the United States Department of Justice, documenting unlawful activities and the arrest of suspected radicals, illegal entrapment, and unlawful detention. In June 1920, Massachusetts District Court Judge George Anderson wrote the release of 17 arrested aliens and criticized the action of the Justice Department. A mob is a mob, wrote Anderson, whether made up of government officials acting under instructions from the Department of Justice or of criminals and loafers in the vicious classes. Ultimately, Anderson's decision prevented any renewal of the raids.
Since the first settlers arrived on these shores, immigrants have made enormous contributions to this country's prosperity. During the 19th and 20th centuries, immigrants were essential to America's economic growth, providing cheap labor for developing industries. In his 1958 book, A Nation of Immigrants, John F. Kennedy cited the importance of immigrants to America's economic success.
Between 1880 and 1920, America became the industrial and agricultural giant of the world. This could not have been done without the hard labor, the technical skills, and the entrepreneurial ability of 23.5 million people who came to America in the period.
The United States is a nation of immigrants, and so it may be one of this country's most glaring contradictions and enduring tragedies, that there persists a mistrust towards those who seek the very same opportunities our ancestors dreamed of. Branding them as terrorists bent on attacking American institutions, current government officials have sought to ban Muslims from several countries from entering the United States. Immigrants from Mexico and other Latin American countries have been labeled criminals and drug dealers. The construction of a wall across America's southern border, according to administration officials, would alleviate the crisis. Ultimately, perhaps the best lesson to America's troubled relationship with immigrants in general is in the words of George Santayana.
Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it.